is Casey Addington, and I'm joined with Jonathan Daley of Nacelle Games. This
Hey,
is the
how's it going?
Rendercast. uh, so basically, I saw that you put out a couple games recently in the past year, and I was pretty intrigued by your success right up from the get-go, and I just figured it was time for me to get to know who you were, and I think everybody else in the world wants to know too. So, um, you're John Daly, Nacelle Games.
Yeah, so well, I mean, all the games you mentioned were actually done with. I did some freelance work with another company in the same town that we're in, and that kind of allowed me to kind of get through the development process a lot of times really quickly. So I did around a dozen games for them. I think I ended up doing. I don't know if all 12 got published or not, or not yet at least. But yeah, so it was pretty soon after GDC 2014. Um, kind of got the ball rolling on founding Nacelle Games. So we're working on our first project right now. I mean, we're kind of going through and prototyping a lot of different ideas to kind of see what's going to be the most viable for us going forward. We do have one game title that we've announced, Colonists. We just released a screenshot for that last week, and on our Facebook page and our Twitter profile. So that's what we're working on now is Colonists, and yeah. So I'm happy to be on the podcast, and it should be a fun time.
Now, when you say we, you're talking about you and your development staff on Nacelle.
Yeah, when I'm talking about we with Colonists, right now Nacelle is three people. My wife and I co-founded the company, and we hired on an artist very recently that he's working with us. So right now we're just three people full time. I mean, that could obviously change at any moment. It really kind of depends on what we need for Colonists and any other projects that come down the pipe. So yeah, that's we right now is three people. So I guess it's one more than us. I guess you could put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I'll get right into it. Just find out a little bit about yourself. What kind of games did you play as you were when you were a kid?
Mostly the classic stuff on the Super Nintendo. I got a Super Nintendo when I was in like elementary school, I think, and it's kind of funny. Like I never really had control over what games I bought. It was always my parents would buy what they thought was cool or what was like the big one being advertised at the time. But I was able to get quite the collection of classics. So things like Super Mario World, like came packed in the box when they used to pack games in boxes all the time, and then like Super Mario Kart and Donkey Kong Country, and I had Star Fox, and the SNES version of Aladdin, which is really good. People say the Genesis version is better, but I really like the Super Nintendo version of Aladdin. So just kind of stuff like that. I did get a PlayStation a couple years after it came out. And I played some of the really good ones on there, like Spyro the Dragon and Crash Bandicoot Warped and Gran Turismo and Legend of Dragoon. So it was basically like I said, kind of what was kind of cool at the time, or what was being advertised. Like I remember the whole reason I got Super Mario Kart. I don't even remember why I was asking for it. I think I just thought it was cool, but I had to ask my parents for it, and they're like. They were kind of like hedging on whether they were going to get it. I was like, well, it's multiplayer. My sisters can play with me. And I was like, look, there's a princess that can play as the princess. And that was actually like the pivotal argument to make them get the game for me, I remember. But like as a kid, like my whole family basically played games together. Like we played video games, but we also played board games too. So I've kind of always played games for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, it's very important to have that family involvement. and people behind it too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so definitely a big fan of the 2D platforms. And
Yeah, that I ended up playing a lot of platformers. So that was kind of, I guess, when I was a kid, that was the main thing I played. And then some RPGs, but mainly the kind of classic platformers.
yeah, yeah. Well, those were definitely great games for their time. Um, all right. So when did you first start making games?
Um, well, I really started making them in earnest in, well, I say in college, but I actually have two college degrees, so it was the second time I went for a college degree. I was making games pretty in earnest, and then within the last couple of years, I've made a lot of apps and then several games. But the first game I made was I was at a summer camp in high school, and there was a computer science part of the camp, and they taught BASIC, which is like not even object oriented programming. It's literally just procedural, like linear stuff. Like even with things like run these 3 lines of code, go to line 30, then it would run those lines in like 31, 32, 33, then like line 34, like go back to line 20, and it would go jump around like that. But the game I wrote was actually a text-based adventure game that was set in the Star Trek universe, because I was and still am a huge Star Trek fan. And I had things like items, where like it would keep track of if you had an item in your inventory or not. You could ask it to display your inventory, and it would display what you had, and you could tell it to use certain items, and you had to be in certain rooms to use certain items, and you had to like figure out how to get out of this outpost you were in before the Romulans like came down and killed you or something like that. Um, I still have the game on, like, it's on a floppy disk somewhere in my office, but I don't actually own a floppy disk drive, so I can't actually boot it up. Like I would, because it ran on MS DOS. Like that was the other thing, was like this programming language. Like I think we're using computers with Windows XP on them, but you like had to boot up inside the terminal, and like run it inside the terminal as a DOS program.
Okay.
Like it would take some doing to get that working again. But yeah, that was the first game I ever did. Um, and then I kind of got away from making a lot of games. I always played a lot of games, but I didn't get back to making them till like probably out 4-ish years ago now, that I started kind of getting back into making games. Um, but yeah, that first one was fun. I wish I could find a way to get access to it again, and it'd be fun to like port that to something playable online. Um,
Yeah. No, that those little text adventure games they're great. I mean, you can spend hours upon hours on them.
yeah, I've done a couple other ones. I did one as part of a school project, and then I started writing another one in my in what and at the time I had a good amount of spare time, about 10 months ago or so, something like that. A little less than a year ago, I had a lot of like downtime. I wouldn't really necessarily call it free time, but I had a lot of downtime at this job I was working at, and I had some time to kind of go in and mess around with making another text adventure game. But it's still sitting on my hard drive unfinished, because I just it was going to be like something super short and simple, and I just never finished that one.
Does that happen from time to time to you, where you have a
Um,
project that just starts out and then it just kind of has a hard time finishing?
Uh, yeah, I mean, my work process has where I go through it. I prototype a lot of things, and I will usually come up with like half a dozen different ideas for a game, and I'll write them all down and I save them. Um, and some of them are really fleshed out. Some of them are like a paragraph of some gameplay idea I wanted to mess around with, and then I'll sit down and like take that initial idea and develop it out on paper first. Pardon me, like in a design document, or in like just kind of writing it out, or I might get to the point where I do some stuff in a spreadsheet if I get that far with the design. And usually by then I can kind of tell if this is going to be something to do or not to do, or if it's gonna, like the right time to kind of develop that idea further. And then there's been a couple times when I've gotten actually into whatever engine I was using at the time and getting some things coded in. Um, but it really comes down to like kind of trying to figure out what's going to be like the best thing at that current time, because like um, before Nacelle Games, I was working pretty much by myself um, for most of my games. Some games I did kind of partner up with some other people to work on. It kind of just depended on who I was working with and kind of the general context of kind of the development for any given idea. So I mean, it happens sometimes, but I mean, I write everything down and I save like 2 or 3 copies of everything that I do. So it's good to have a bunch of ideas. So when you get done with something and like, okay, I need another thing to go for, then I can go look for things to, and I always go back to like what I'd written down first and kind of, cross off anything there before going on.
Right. So you get to refer to what you had previously worked on already and use that for
Yeah.
kind of a model.
Yeah, I mean, a good example would be like for Colonists, that the original game design document, which we're actually not even going off of anymore. Like we looked at the original design document, which was, I think, something like 1 or 2 pages, like 1,500 words of a game design, and then we kind of took that and took kind of the core pieces out of that, and are now using them in a different way. But like that core document was like over a year old. Like I had done it like a year prior. I had just written down this idea that I had for a game and then didn't touch it, didn't do anything with it. I just had an idea come to me and wrote it down and saved it. And now that's what, in the Cell Games, that's what we're using now as our first project. So it's always good to write things down because you never know when you'll use it. It could be a year later, it could be multiple years later.
Yeah. Well, uh, I guess we kind of veered off a little bit. What was your inspiration for choosing game development as a career?
Um, well, like when I was a kid, like I played games a lot. I mean, they outside of like doing chores at home and finishing like schoolwork, the main thing I did was play games. And I had a lot of friends that was kind of our main pastime was all playing games. Like when you're a kid, like games are a thing and you go play them, but you don't really think about like how they get made or like how it becomes a thing. It just is a thing. And like I remember being younger and having this like aha moment, like, oh, people make these things. I was like, that'd be really cool to make these things. But of course, that was all based on like the idea of making them would be the same as playing them, which is completely not the case. Once you
No,
get to actually
not at
make,
all.
it's not even there's not even a comparison between the two. I mean, they're still both fun and really cool, and you still making games and playing games. You still like both of them, but they're very different. But like as a kid, like my like 7, 8 year old mind was like, oh yeah, I want to make these. This would be awesome. Um, so it kind of stemmed from that, and then later on, like in college, I had an interest in programming. Um, and that kind of led me back to making games because I found I've done programming for like business type applications and kind of things that are structured that way, and programming for games, and I've always found it, for me personally, more interesting and more challenging to program for games, especially gameplay programming is what I really really love to do, really more so than anything else. And so that kind of interest in programming and computer science and mixed with this kind of kid idea of like making games would be awesome is kind of what kind of drove me into that direction of picking making games for a living.
Right. So, would you say that you you could actually visualize yourself, like say when you were in high school, could you actually visualize yourself as making games?
When I was in high school, I hadn't really come to that realization yet because I wasn't as interested in programming then as I became later. So I was really more interested at that time in games journalism and like doing things like previews and reviews, and like at the time I was a huge fan of GameSpot.com, which back in the day it was when they had like the dream team of all the editors that I and all the journalists that I really liked and looked up to and appreciated their work. I think it was back in like the mid 2000s, like 2003, 4, 5 ish, and a little bit after, where like Brian Davis was was at GameStop at the time, and Jeff Gershman was there, and Brad Shoemaker. Some of those guys are over at GiantBomb.com now, but I always really appreciated the stuff that they were doing, and even now, like Giant Bomb is one of my favorite sites to go and look at their quick looks and read their reviews and watch their interviews too. So it was like they kind of married. Like I was really interested in writing in high school and games, and I thought, well, the best mashup of those is to do games journalism or be a games critic, and I kind of went down that path for a little bit before I got interested in programming, and kind of went the went the other direction of making games instead of just writing about them.
All right. Well, with any luck, here before too long, you'll be talking to them in person.
Yeah,
Maybe their articles will be on you.
Yeah, that would definitely be a pretty cool thing. Especially like tell your 10-year-old self, hey, you get to talk to these guys someday.
Well, I mean, if you got a dream, you have to follow it. So you've been to school for game development. What else have you studied?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I actually have 2 degrees. So I have a bachelor's degree in English literature, and then I have an associate's degree in simulation and game development, which don't sound like they're related really at all, and I guess really they aren't on any core level. I am vastly interested in where they intersect, especially thinking of games as literature, or games being used as literature in the classroom. But yeah, so I have those two those 2 degrees. So they come in handy.
What would you say that it helps you in your development process?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, just school in general is a good way to kind of increase your critical thinking skills, which is a huge thing for when you're both doing game design, like actually designing gameplay systems. Critical thinking is a huge part of that, and then on top of that, hang on, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so like on top of that, like just going to school, period, a lot of it is about, like, I guess everyone's told, and it at some core central place, it's the truth that you're going to school to learn things. But my experience has been like the most important things I've gotten out of school has been the people that I've met, because most of the people that I've met, especially through the game development degree that I got, the people that I met there have allowed me to meet other people that are in the game industry, or have allowed for opportunities to open up that wouldn't have otherwise, because I didn't know those people.
It's good for networking then.
Yeah, like, and that sounds weird that you would pay all the money to go to school just to network, but that's a kind of a good bonus side effect of going to school, is you get to meet a lot of people that way. I mean, there's still like a lot of core things that you get taught in a classroom, but it really depends on like what program you go to and what track you're on. But really, everybody that I've talked to about it or had discussions with about like what you learn out of a school program, especially when you're talking about game development, is that it's a really good starting place, but it's not an end-all be-all of it. Like, you're not going to go to a college and get a game development degree and immediately be a game developer. There's so many other facets to game development that just aren't, they either aren't taught or you can't really teach it because a lot of it's skill-based and experience-based. So if you were to just stop where your classes stopped, then you're not going to get as far as you could if you like basically work on things outside of class or be more proactive in learning new tools and new techniques that maybe aren't taught in your classroom. Because as I know quite a few instructors who and a lot of teachers from high school all up through college, and talking to them about the same thing where they only have so much time and so many resources to teach anything in a class, and the time and the resources that they spent are going to be on kind of the big topics or the things that they are required to do versus like there's so many other things that you could be involved with or be able to do, or so many other ways to solve certain problems. Like they'll hit the highlights or they'll hit the most obvious solutions, but sometimes there's other things that they just don't have the time or the resources to cover in a class. But if you take the time yourself to go and do that work outside of the classroom, then that is a huge benefit. And that to me has been, the extra schooling I got was more so for kind of introducing me to the concepts, give me kind of a path to start down and a direction to head, and then I just kind of took it from there and just kept going. So.
All right. Well, so and you made this as your full-time job now, making games, right?
Yeah, with Nacelle Games, I'm the lead designer and lead programmer, which sounds like a lot of work, and it is. But since we're such a small, we're such a small studio, it's like I said, it's just three of us. It's you got to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And are you thinking about expansion anytime in the future? Or?
I mean, I never say never, so who knows? I'd love to be able to do that. It's really going to just depend on what we're doing for our project and what our needs are for that particular project. So for the project working on Now Colonists, we needed an artist, so we brought one on board. So it's very much a need-based thing, and that's with any business. It's you don't expand just for the sake of expansion. You have to have a reason to do it or a need that you have to fill, and the ability to fill that. So you have to have like the ability to make that need or to have that, and then be able to fill it as well. So I mean, you could always expand, and that's obviously the goal of any business is to expand. But it's all going to be based on what we're working on at the time and what needs that project has.
Good. How do you keep organized while you're working on your projects?
I think how to. Well, I've actually been asked this question a couple different times, and there's a quote from one of my favorite movies, the third Indiana Jones, where Dr. Jones Sr. There says, trying to remember the full quote so I don't screw it up. I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember, and that's kind of been my motto for doing stuff. Is that I mentioned this earlier, that I write everything down, and I make several backups of things so that I can't lose things or forget when I wrote something down or anything like that. So like during a development cycle, usually a project is kind of starts, as far as organizing everything together, I start everything with a design document and getting kind of the really broad strokes down of what the game's going to be and look like and do. And 9 times out of 10, I would almost say 10 out of 10 almost, that the final game has almost nothing in common with most of the stuff in the design document. The core is still there, but really the design document is supposed to be broad enough and vague enough that when you kind of get all that down, it's really just for organizing your thoughts in a single document, and then you kind of take it from there. But as soon as you actually get into doing any development work, like getting towards an alpha build of the game, like really everything is open to be tossed out the window, because something that might sound really awesome on paper, when you get it in the game or start actually playing the game, like a couple of games I've done pen and paper versions of them before they went digital, and like you go and start actually playing the game and you realize that this really awesome idea is actually really cumbersome, or it doesn't make sense, or it's not evoking the correct response from players or the response that you thought it would. So then you got to kind of tweak and bend things and remove things and rip things out and add different ideas and things like that. But once I'm kind of past that kind of alpha build stage, most of the stuff ends up in Evernote. I use that because it syncs across all my devices. So it could be where if I'm away from the computer and just have my phone and someone messages me and say, oh, by the way, this, that, and the other, then I can go in and write that on my task list or write down a note or something like that to kind of just remind me of something for later. So mainly it's writing everything down and making sure it's written down and then backed up as many places as possible. So if a failure of I don't remember where I put it or a computer dies or whatever, and you still have everything.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's definitely very important to have everything written down and documented, as well as you can have it at least a projection of what you're gonna be working on.
Yeah, and it comes more into play, and because I've actually worked with students a lot. I worked as a lab assistant actually for the program that I got my game degree through, and I've talked to students a lot about this. Is that especially when working with other people, like you might have an idea in your head of what you want to do for whatever project you're working on, but if you don't have it written down, it can be very hard to communicate that with other people if it's not written down, because a lot of people will have like this really great idea and you ask them about it and then they take 5 minutes to try to explain it and they don't realize how maybe they aren't explaining it right, or maybe that's like how they're explaining it is kind of convoluted or really lengthy when they could chop it down. And I found that for some people it's easier to just write it down and say, oh, well, I'm writing like a page on this thing that I thought would be a paragraph. And then you could kind of more objectively look at it because it's kind of in black and white in front of you on a page, like, oh, okay, this is too complicated, or I can explain this better, and then you can start kind of working on that. And then that's also easier to hand someone a paper or email them and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, so that someone could then look at it and read it and kind of critique it and get back to you. It's more about kind of a communication thing as well.
So, do you prefer working solo on your games when you're working on them, or you like being in a group discussing back and forth what's going to be happening?
I've worked both ways. I've done games that are solo, like before founding Nacelle Games, I made a game called Jumping Blocks, and that was entirely developed solo. The only part that I was working with other people is when I did testing. I had some alpha and some beta testers that did testing for me and gave me feedback. And then I've also worked on small groups of like 3 or 4 people, and both ways you go, there's different challenges. I mean, my main thing is it's really hard to make a game, like period. It's just hard to make games, and if you can take that workload and kind of split it up amongst other people that you know and trust that are going to do a good job, you're going to get a better game for it. And on top of all of that, nobody is awesome at everything that's required to make a game. It's just, no one's going to be an awesome artist and an awesome concept artist and 3D artist and an awesome programmer. I mean, you could be good at all that stuff, but it's better from my experience, it's better if someone can focus on a single thing. Where like, okay, you're doing all of the 3D art and models, and that person can just focus on that, and then someone else are like, okay, you're doing all the UI design, and he or she can focus on that, and then okay, I'm doing the programming, and you can focus on that. And that way you're not spreading yourself too thin, because it also comes down to that, if you're working solo, then you're one person, and if you're working on any one thing, all the other things are not getting done as well. And that's kind of a thing that that can really get you to be behind schedule if you're trying to keep a schedule when you're working as a lone developer. There are people that do it, and there are people that make games, and it's just one person, and they do all the work and they get it done, and they do amazing stuff, but it's really hard to do that individually. So working on a team is really kind of the better. Even if it's just a team of 2 people, like having someone else to bounce an idea off of, or having someone else that you can kind of break up the work in, is in my opinion the better way to go. Now, if you're just starting out, like if you're just starting to make games, or you're at a place where there aren't other people that you can get in touch with, like locally where you live or anything like that, then it is possible to make a game by yourself. You just kind of have to understand that you're going to have to do things that maybe you're not the best at, and it's going to take longer because it's one person doing all that stuff instead of breaking it up among a lot of people. So I guess I would say I'd have a preference working in a group, because in the end you can have a better game. Now, the downside to that I've heard people tell, and I've thought about this before, is that the more people you add, the more voices, and it's not 100% your game anymore. But then at the same time, I think that's an okay trade-off to say I'm going to make a better game. Maybe it's not 100% my idea, but it's kind of presumptuous to think that your ideas are 100% better than anybody else's anyways. So I think that it's better to work in a team if possible if you're going to start up to make a game. But if that's not an option, or you don't want to work in a team for whatever reason, like, you can do it by yourself, but it's a lot of work both ways, and it's better to kind of spread that work around, I think.
Okay. So you recently created Nacelle Games. What were some of the major hurdles involved in creating your company?
Let's see. Honestly, the biggest one was just picking a name that was unique. I mean, everything else was really straightforward. It was just the name is kind of the big thing that everything kind of hinges on that. And like over the years, I'd come up with different ideas for studio names. I was like, if I ever do this, maybe I'll pick that name, or maybe I'll pick this other name. And then when it came time to actually pick one, all the names that I had written down, several variants of them were taken, or were really close to something else. And even people from only semi-related industries. Like I think one of the names we're thinking of was the same name as like a photography company out of the UK. And I was like, well, I mean, we could be the same name, but I don't know. Like, that was a lot of like that kind of back and forth about thinking about that. But then after a couple of days of kind of thinking about it and tossing some ideas around, then my wife and I, who we co-founded the company, we settled on Nacelle Games. That was the most difficult thing. Like, everything else was just paperwork and getting all that together, and is not overly difficult. There's a lot of different pathways you can take to do that. So that actually making a company is not hard. It's just getting the name was kind of the biggest hurdle for us.
Okay. Well, and how did you come up with that name?
Well, it's it kind of has a few different meanings. The first is it is a nod to Star Trek, because my whole family's a huge Star Trek, are all huge Star Trek fans. So like the word nacelle actually is used pretty ubiquitously in all of the Star Trek series, and then I've also had a passing interest in etymology. which is the study of the origin of words, since college, and so um, a lot of the names that I had come up with, I was searching what the roots of all those words were and what their if there was some meaning that was kind of lost to time that might be a cool tie back. And I found out that the word nacelle is actually Latin in its roots, and it had a meaning of small boat. So when I found that out, I was like, I kind of had this thought of like this imagery of like a small boat on a big ocean, and I was like, that's kind of a cool image, and it ties into Star Trek, so we'll go with that.
So a small boat and a big boat, huh?
Yeah, and then on our logo, I drew up in like 20 minutes, threw together the logo. I actually did a couple different logos. I think each logo took like 20 or 30 minutes on, and then we picked between a couple of them, a couple different color schemes, and a couple different, completely different logo types before we settled on the one we landed on, which is a small. Oddly enough, it's a small boat.
Yeah. So, say you got approached by some triple game industry, um, executive or something. They said, "Hey, we really like this last game you put out. We want to buy your company and have you come work for us." What would you think about something like that?
Well, like I said earlier, I never say never, but any situation that came up like that, it would have to be, um, it would be incredibly situational. About like every piece of that is something that you can't, I wouldn't want to do any conjecture on. Like I said, never say never, but at this point, we're a small independent studio just wanting to, you know, make games. So that's kind of what we're focused on. I mean, if that were to happen, it would be, I don't know, it would, like I said, it would be a highly situational thing, and it would not be something we take lightly either way.
Have you ever thought about that? I'm sure you probably at some point in time thought to yourself like, man, I'm gonna go work for this AAA company or that one.
I mean, the thought had come up like when I was going through school, but there was also in the middle of my going to school, there was a huge transformation in the indie scene and what it meant to be indie and what you could do. I mean, back when I was playing games back in college, it's like and before that, way back in the Super NES days and stuff, way back then was the model for getting your game to market was completely different, and in that you had to have a publisher and you had to be kind of a medium to large company to do any of this, and then by that extension, to work in the game industry you had to work at a medium to large company, and that you just weren't going to find small, less than 10-person companies doing anything worthwhile in the game industry just because of how everything was set up as far as like how you had to make games and how expensive it was to make them, and like everything to do with the retail channel and having marketing where you had to have stuff in stores and reserve shelf space and all that stuff. All that's changed in the last several years. Like everything now is, we're to the point that like a perfect example would be Supergiant Games. They just released their game Transistor like last week. Their previous game Bastion was published by I believe WB Games. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was WB Games.
I think it was, yeah.
So like they had a publisher, and they came out on the Xbox Live Arcade, and they came out on Steam. And the only reason I got out on Xbox Live Arcade was they had a publisher. That's just how it worked back then. Now with Transistor, which is I think about 3 years later, like they are self-publishing on the PS4 and on Steam, and that's just something that did not exist several years ago. So like because of that whole transition and how everything as far as your barrier of entry is lowered, even things like Unity and the new licensing for Unreal Engine 4 and the new licensing for the CryEngine, all of that stuff has come together to make it a lot easier for a smaller company to make something and get it out there in front of people to be able to play and to get their games. And with all of that, all those changes, it opens up a lot more avenues for someone looking to work in the industry. Where it used to be you had to get a job for a AAA company or a game publisher or go to work QA. Like those were your options. You didn't really have many options beyond those. Those were the big options to go for. And now it's completely the other way around, that you have small studios starting up and you can go and make your game and get it published, on a game console like the Xbox One or the PS4. They both have their different self-publishing models and independent game studio programs where you can get your game published, or doing stuff on mobile, Android or iOS or Windows Phone or whatever you want to do. Like that's all an option now that wasn't before. So again, never saying never that I wouldn't, go work for a AAA game studio 10 years from now. Who knows? Because like I said, all that stuff is, highly situational. But now there's so many more options that you don't have to shoehorn yourself into any one option. You can really pick and choose what you want to do.
Yeah, and that's a great part of the industry that's coming through right now. It seems like you don't really have to worry as much about being locked up in a building with 100 other people who are making games. You can do it on your own with your own small group, people people you've worked with before. So do you see that as a trend that's going to continue?
I think so. There's a really vibrant game developer community on Twitter, and my interaction with them has been really incredibly positive. And then it just the barrier of entry just keeps getting lower and lower. Just looking at recently what Epic Games did with the Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine 3, you had to pay quite a bit for a full license and had to be an established studio to do that. Or there was the UDK version, but UDK was it wasn't the full engine. It was kind of a subset of the tools you had access to, and it was still really good, and you can make some really amazing things with it. But now with Unreal Engine 4, anybody can get full access to the source code and all their new features. And they're pushing new stuff almost daily up to, they've said that they're pushing stuff all the time that you can get access to as a subscriber. And that whole model is just kind of, I think, indicative of how the industry is going to go. Is go more towards, as Unity has put it before, kind of democratizing game development and making it available to more and more people that want to get involved and make their own games.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing the amount of tools that are being put out there for indie developers, it seems like. So, now, is there a specific game style or genre that you wanna specialize in with your company now?
There's not anything specific that Nacelle Games wants to focus on. Our motto, like our company motto, is making the games we want to play. So that's really, we're going to be focusing on what kind of what we ourselves are interested in making, and not necessarily making what's the new hot thing right now. We're trying to be more forward thinking than that. So I have things that I'm personally interested in, but again, it's I'm just one person in the company. So if I have a personal interest in something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the company is going to do it, because we're trying to be more democratic than that about where we're going and trying to be really forward thinking in the kinds of games we're making and everything else with the business. Me personally, I have a big interest in, I guess I kind of call them short form games, where I have an English literature background, so thinking of that, you have different forms of literature. So you have the novel, which is several hundred pages. That would be equivalent to like your standard 40 to 60 hour campaign, like your Assassin's Creeds and your your RPGs that might take you 60, 80, 100 hours to get through all the content. But then on the other end of that spectrum, you have the short story, which in literature is meant to be read in one sitting. So they're typically really short and short story, but that form allows you to do different things when you're writing a story, and I think that games are kind of going that direction too. So there's been some really good examples of shorter games that are really narrative driven that you can sit down and play in 1 or 2 sittings, and in like 3 or 4 hours completely finish the game. So things like Gone Home or Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, or The Stanley Parable, and you can throw Antechamber in there too. That those are games that you can sit down and play through in a couple hours, and their story elements, whether they're like super specific like Gone Home, or they're a little more I'm trying to think, a little more abstract like Antechamber, that the things that happen early on in those games' narrative are kind of still fresh in your mind when you get to the end of the narrative. So they can do a lot of things with foreshadowing and other different narrative tropes that don't necessarily work in like a 60-hour campaign, because you might finish the campaign in a month. In an hour 55 they refer to something that happened in hour 2. Maybe you don't remember because it was a month ago, and it was also like 50 hours ago of playing. So I'm kind of interested in how that's shaping up these shorter games that still pack a lot of punch with their narrative and still have really interesting gameplay mechanics, but they're shorter games, and they're games that you can easily go back to and play again. Gone Home takes like 2 hours to finish, so if you want to someday go back and play that, it's investing as much as a movie, right, or a couple TV episodes, and people do that all the time. You can go through and play something in 2 hours and be able to get a completeness of the storyline, or a completeness of that game in such a short time span. So that's something that's really interested me. Now, again, not necessarily saying that Nacelle Games is going to make a 2-hour narrative game, but that's something that me personally that I'm interested in. And then kind of the other thing that I've been interested in is kind of the cross-section of games and education and teaching things. It's kind of another thing that I'm personally interested in, because I think that
like serious game type material.
Like maybe serious games, not necessarily. I think it's I'm wanting to think more broad about it in terms of, I think that the interactivity that games allow, and the fact that like an example would be if you're teaching kids physics, right? You can't get all the schools can't afford all the equipment to do all the physics experiments that they maybe want to do. So being able to do that in a digital environment, and even throwing in some cool tech like VR, there's like a really cool like intersection of teaching a concept and having kind of an interactive game environment that you can, a student can play around with, and you could teach things like mathematics or physics or logical thinking skills. I just think that that's kind of a huge resource that's not being fully tapped into right now. So I think that that's going to be a really cool thing to kind of watch develop, and to see how that develops over the next couple of years.
Well, I guess the next thing I was wondering is what is your favorite part of the game making process?
The favorite part of the game making process. Honestly, I would say shipping a game. Like I know it sounds silly to say that, because at that point you're really done making the game. But it's like seeing something come together at the end, and kind of packaging it up, and then being able to get it out there and see people's reaction and feedback to something that they're playing, is really amazing. And that's kind of like one of the big payoffs to making games, is to get your game in the hands of people to play it. You start to see some of that when you're playtesting, but not to the degree of getting it out there and having hundreds or thousands of people play your game, and start talking about it or leaving reviews about it, and giving feedback, and that's just, that whole ending process is really amazing. Being able to kind of look back and see what you built and people's reactions to it.
Yeah,
Besides
it's
that, though,
kind of like a retrospect kind of thing. You get to think about what
yeah,
you've done.
yeah, and it's actually interesting in the game industry at large. There's a practice called postmortems, where after you finish a project or a game, you actually go back and you pick X number of good things about the project and X number of bad things about the project. Usually, kind of pair them together, like 5 good things, 5 bad things, or something like that. Kind of as a retrospective on the project, so you can kind of take the lessons learned from that and move forward with it. Um, but yeah, so there's that part of it. I mean, besides actually shipping a game and finishing it, I really enjoy the prototyping process of kind of getting new ideas and kind of testing them out. I actually really especially like the part where, before you even get to a game engine or any code, really writing everything down on paper and even making a pen and paper version of a game, and kind of being really hands-on with something, kind of physically interacting with something as opposed to through a screen or a controller. At least when you're kind of creating ideas and creating interesting elements to play around with, that part's a lot of fun. So I guess like the very beginning and the
Yeah.
very end are the favorite parts for me. I mean, I still like the entire process overall, and otherwise I wouldn't be doing it for a living. But
Right.
just the newness of a project and kind of getting kind of a handle on exactly what you want to do and playing around with crazy ideas is a lot of fun. And then getting something actually together and solid and shipping is uh, is a kind of a it's a relief, but then at the same time it's like then you're kind of geared up and ready to take on the next thing too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's a great segue to be able to, look back at the last thing that you were working on and then say, oh, it's time for me to start something new up. Well, I just got done with this project, and these are the things that I thought about that, and you have your notes and you have all your materials in front of you. So it's kind of like would you say it spurs you on towards your next goal?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. It would. It's that's kind of how it goes because I mean, game development in general is kind of an up and down, kind of a roller coaster ride, and I guess for different people, they're gonna have different high and low points. But I think it's pretty universal of like finishing a project and getting it done out there, and then kind of catching your breath for a little bit, and then moving into the next one. And kind of that there's that kind of moment of like relief and zero tension of like, okay, we're done, this game's out there, and then that excitement of and being pushed towards, okay, let's do the next one.
Yeah. So with that in mind, what are your major goals regarding your game design?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, but our motto here at Nacelle is making the games we want to play. So
Hmm.
what that really means is when we're making a game, whether it's a gameplay concept or an idea or a feature that we're looking at, we're always constantly asking ourselves if that's something that we'd want to see in a game that we're playing. So if it comes up that we're having something in a game or we're thinking about adding or removing something, kind of stop and think like, okay, if this was a game that I was playing, like I had bought this game or I downloaded it to play, would this be something that I would see that I would be excited about or that I would want to see stay or go, and kind of look at it that way to say, okay, is this something that me as a player of games, not necessarily a maker of games, but a player of games, is this something that I would want to see in the game? And we try to approach our design that way, so that we're making games. We're making games for people to play. Obviously, that's what we're in business to do. But also, we're making games for ourselves. We're making things that we want to actually sit down and play through as well. So we're trying to see it from both sides of the coin of making something that's going to be fun to play and going to be something viable for us, but also looking at it from the perspective of if I'm a person who plays games and I like this style of game, would I want to see this in it or not, or vice versa. So that's kind of one of our major goals is to kind of keep both aspects in mind, both designing the games as well as the people that are going to be playing them. And then also, we're wanting our games to be, fun to play, definitely, but also we want to kind of bring things up in a new way, or be able to see things from a new perspective, or be able to kind of challenge the player. And that could be challenging them with something that's difficult to play, or challenging to play, or something that is challenging you in a different way, like shedding new light on a topic or what have you. That's kind of our big, because we want our games to kind of embody those kind of things.
Okay. Well, it sounds exciting. We're definitely looking for. What did you say that the newest game you're working on is?
Colonist is the one that we've announced the name of, and you can check out our Facebook page to see that screenshot. It's a screenshot of a skyhook, which it was funny. We already had some feedback on. Technically, skyhooks don't actually reach all the way to the ground. But we're creating a fiction along with this game, and that's what they're called in the game fiction, is a skyhook. Technically, it's a space tether, but we've got a picture of that, and it's actually one of the models that'll be in the game, kind of as a teaser of what we're working on now. But Colonist is the one we've announced about. We have other things in the works that we're looking at, prototyping different ideas, but Colonist is the game that we're kind of our big project that we're working on now.
Okay. And if you want to just put it out there, just for bragging purposes, what other games have you published recently?
Well, me personally, I've published a game called Jumping Blocks that was I think it was last summer, I believe. I am blanking on. It's been a while that game's been out there. And that's a physics platformer for iOS that was created in the Unity 3D engine. So that's something that I published myself, and then I've actually also personally published a lot of apps, or several apps for both iOS and Windows Phone.
Mm-hmm.
Then I worked with on freelance with another company that they published several games that I've worked on for them. If you want to see what I've personally done, you can find me at my website. Which the easiest way to actually find that is to find me on Twitter at Jonathan A. Daley. And then my website is on there, and my personal website. And you can go and check out the games that I've published there. All the games that were published by the company I was working with are for Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. And then now with Nacelle Games, we're working on Colonist. Is the game we're working on now,
Okay.
which is in development.
And you also have a Facebook page, right?
Nacelle Games, yeah, we have a Facebook page. You can search, if you just search for Nacelle Games, it's NACELLE GAMES. And we're also on Twitter at Nacelle Games, same spelling, NACELLE GAMES. And our website is the same as well, nacellegames.com. So you can find out a little more about us on nacellegames.com. There's also contact information there, an email address, or you can contact us on Twitter. And we'd love to, answer any questions people have that we can answer. There's some things, like if you were to ask us about Colonist, there's not a lot of information we can put out there about it right now, other than, it has space tethers in it, and it's being done in Unreal Engine 4. That's the other thing we released I think the week before last. We talked about that we're using Unreal Engine 4 for Colonist. So that's the engine that we've chosen to work with.
Have you thought about any kind of target dates or anything? Or is
Not at this point. I mean, we're still really early in development with Colonist. So it's something we're working on every day. But
yeah.
there's no solid date yet. We're really too early in the development cycle to really determine a date for release.
Yeah. Well, it sounds really exciting. There's a lot going on for you, and I know we're all excited to find out about colonists. I know we're all, jumping up and down for jumping blocks. That goes back a little bit before Nacelle Games, but um, we definitely want to keep in mind that you're going to be keeping on with these new games coming up. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude the broadcast?
Um, not anything other than just we would definitely want to connect with all our fans. So if you haven't done so already, if you want to keep track of what we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter at Nacelle Games, and you can also like us on Facebook. Those are the two primary social media outlets that we're going through right now. We'll probably eventually have a YouTube page when we actually have video to show, but again, it's just too early in the development process to get to that point. But it's really Twitter and Facebook. We also have a blog on our website that we're trying to update about once every week to week and a half. It really kind of depends on what our development schedule is looking like, but we're trying to keep that updated as well. So you can head on over to our website. Again, it's nacellegames.com, and you can find our Facebook page and our Twitter profile on there, links to them, as well as a contact email if you need to contact us about anything. It's all right there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that about wraps it up. Thanks, John, for having this interview with me and letting us get to know you a little bit better, a little bit about your company.
Yeah,
what's that?
I said my pleasure. Thanks for having me and Nacelle Games on the Rendercast. And
absolutely.
We'll be happy to come back on anytime.
All right. Well, hopefully it won't be too long. I'm Casey Addington, and that is the Rendercast for the day.